Hi, I'm Tanya Buxton and I'm at Killer Beauty HQ today, and I'm here to show you how to check your needles before each tattoo procedure. So it's really important that you check each and every needle before you start tattooing. Even though needles are really great quality now, it is still crucial that you check each and every needle for any potential faults or inconsistencies before you start your tattoo procedure. A faulty needle is probably one of the major troubleshootings that you will find if you're having difficulty implanting pigment into the skin. So this is why it's important that we just double check everything and make sure that the needles are of the best quality. So to check your needle, all you will need is a jeweler's eye loupe. These are really inexpensive and will be your best friend for life. They're available at Killer Beauty. The link is in the description below. The reason we use an eye loupe when we're checking our needles is because these potential inconsistencies and faults, they're just not visible to the naked eye. They can be so teeny tiny and minor, but are there and could cause big problems. But we do need to make sure we get a real magnified look at the needle, so we're really checking it thoroughly. So to check your needle, just grab your eye loupe and the needle that you need to check. If you're using a cartridge, which most of us are, just take the plunger and plunge it all the way up so the needle's nice and exposed. I like to hold it up to the light or up against a light surface just so I can really see the needle well. And I bring the eye loupe really close to my eye. So I'll bring the eye loupe all the way to my eye, grab my exposed needle and then just draw it in until it's nice and clear. And I'll take a good look around the needle, have a look at it from the bird's eye view as well. And I'm just checking for any inconsistencies, any little faults on any of the individual needle pins, just to make sure that everything is in perfect working order. Some of the main things that you need to be checking for with your needle is if any of the needle pins are barbed. So when we're talking about a barbed needle, this is where the tip of your taper is sort of hooked over slightly. Now, if a needle is barbed, this can cause a lot of problems as you start tattooing. It can cause a lot of trauma to the skin, make ink retention really difficult. The skin can become really red, really aggravated. It can be bleeding a bit more. The client can even be in a little bit more pain. This is because you've got all your needles that should be nice and straight, and then you've got a little teeny tiny needle that's kind of hooked over, and that will be dragging against the skin as you're tattooing. So this is where you will get all that extra inflammation from. This can also happen during your tattoo as well. Like, we've all accidentally hit the end of our ink cap before as we've dipped our ink in. So if anything like that does happen, it's always good just to recheck the needle. If there's any kind of troubleshooting while you're tattooing, just check your needle first. Another thing to check for before you start tattooing with your needle is if any of the needle pins are blunt. So this is where our needle taper, if the very tip of that needle taper is a little bit blunt, it's just going to cause extra trauma to the skin, just purely because the needle's not nice and sharp and it's not implanting into the skin as efficiently as possible. So again, you could find the skin is more inflamed, it's more difficult to kind of implant that pigment as well, and it could be bleeding a little bit more, all just because that needle's not as sharp as it needs to be. And one of the final things to check for is inconsistencies in the needle. So an inconsistency could be where an individual needle pin is maybe slightly higher than the rest. So particularly in like a liner, if we've got all our needle pins together in our liner, but one is ever so slightly longer than the rest, that needle will be going into the skin at a deeper level than the rest of the needles. So we're causing more trauma, potential scarring as well. And it could be that it's making the skin bleed a little bit more. It could be more inflamed, and just making the whole process that little bit harder. Another inconsistency that you need to check for is if an individual needle pin is not kind of in line and parallel with everything else. So within a liner, obviously, all our needles kind of come together and taper in. If we have a little needle pin that's slightly out and not in line with everything, again, as we're tattooing, you've got a needle that's dragging against the direction of all the other needles. So you can be causing more trauma to the skin, you could be tearing that skin up. So we just need to kind of check that all the needles are nice and in line, and kind of as uniformed as possible. With a mag, we need to check these things as well. So again, making sure that all the needle pins are all parallel and sort of soldered to the same point, so there's no needle pins poking out any further than the rest. And also to make sure that all those needle pins are nice and parallel with each other and nice and uniformed. So particularly with a mag, if we have a needle pin and a little needle pin is kind of slightly out compared to the rest, as you're sort of tattooing along, you have this little rogue needle pin that is pulling against the rest of the skin. So you could really be tearing that skin up. It might not be overly visible at the time, but the sort of clues would be that the skin's a lot redder, it might be bleeding a little bit more, and we are causing that extra trauma to the skin. So this is why it's really important that we check our needles before we start. Even though our needle cartridges nowadays are really great quality, it is still important that we check each and every needle before our tattoo procedure. Needles are still mass produced and faults can still occur, just through human error really. So it's important that we just take our eye loupe and really have a good look and just double check all our needles. A faulty needle is probably the #1 culprit of troubleshooting during a tattoo procedure. A faulty needle is usually the #1 culprit of any kind of troubleshooting while we're tattooing. So just taking a few seconds to check our needle before our procedure, and even during the tattoo if you're coming into any kind of issues implanting pigment, is the best idea. I really hope this video was helpful. If you need any more advice or information, there are loads of free tutorials available on the Killer Beauty YouTube channel.